Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Very Cold Lasagna podcast. I'm your host, DylanLasagna, and this is episode number 202 of this icy yet spicy podcast with all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And in this episode, we are here to begin our annual tradition that we've done every July since 2022, and that is NFL Season Preview Month. So for those of you that are new to Very Cold Lasagna or haven't tuned into any of my NFL season previews since that year of 2022, well, basically, it's what the title entails. We preview, we prelude to the NFL regular season, which starts in September, but why not start now? Why not get ahead of ourselves over 2 months early and talk about every single team, all 32 teams in the National Football League over the span of several episodes during the month of July and sometimes extending into August. But regardless, we talk about all 32 teams and what are my filthy casual expectations for them going into the regular season, which starts in September. So I'm excited to talk about some football once again. It's been quite some time, and I know everyone's saying, oh, we're in a wrestling boom there, pal. But honestly, yes, well, it has been all right to talk about a little bit of wrestling during that little down period between the Super Bowl and where we're at now. There's only been like one or two storylines that have been interesting. Maybe make that three. But other than that, it's been all right. It's been meh. I've been missing talking about football. And, well, here we are again in the month of July, ready to go hard. Go hard for football. Not, not in that way. But anyway, that being said, before we get talking about our first set of teams here on Very Cold Lasagna for our season previews, make sure, if you're watching this on YouTube, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button, and I just want to say thank you as we hit 200 subscribers. I wasn't sure if that was legit, but thank you for 200 subscribers. Let's make sure we keep on the up and up. Let's get to 250 by some point in either September. I don't want to go too ballistic here. Maybe September, October. Maybe that's a little unrealistic, but we'll see. Let's try to make it happen. 250, 225 by September, but we'll see. Anyway, smash the subscribe button, share this with your friends, share this with strangers. Leave your comment down below on your takes on whatever topic we're talking about in each and every episode. In this case, it's our first set of teams in our NFL season preview month. And if you're watching this listening to this on audio, pardon me, make sure to rate and review the show 1 to 5 stars, and follow the show on social media on Very Cold Lasagna, at Very Cold Lasagna, on Twitter and Instagram. And like I said, make sure you share this with your friends, share this with your neighbors, share this with a stranger, share this with your colleagues at work or at school, and just spread the good, the bad, the ugly on my filthy casual takes about this show. Whatever I spread on this show. That being said, let's break it down. NFL season preview month. For those of you that, again, new, those of you that haven't listened to any of my NFL season previews, whether it is my debut year in 2022 or last year, basically, this is how it goes. NFL season preview month is not like how I do NFL season recaps all throughout the month of March. So basically how we do it is, well, it's a prelude to what's going to happen from September to January. So we basically just talk about my expectations for each team, like what they do in the offseason, what they do to make themselves better or worse. And I just come up with my takeaways. What are my biggest takeaways? What are my biggest questions going for them into this season? And what are their key games that are going to define their season for, let's say, this team or that team? So that being said, every preview is going to be subject to change. I still have plenty of questions for them, especially as we go into training camp and into the preseason, which haven't started, by the way. There's still plenty of time, especially as we're talking about these first batch of teams. And as we get later down the road, training camp will have kicked in. So keep in mind, these previews don't take into account like what has happened in like the off-season activities that they have taken place in May and the mini camps that happened this past month in June. So personally, I don't really take into account that stuff because me being a casual fan, like I don't really pay attention to like a lot of football. Like I'm being blunt. I'm being brutally honest with you. I do not pay attention to like a lot of offseason stuff other than the draft, free agent, like certain free agency news. So I'm just being blunt with y'all. That's why I'm a casual sports fan. This is the whole point of this show. But anyway, yeah, these previews are gonna be from the eye of a casual sports fan. So, I mean, I can't blame you for coming in here, giving you all rah takes, because that's your point of view. So, yeah, just keep in mind, this is your only disclaimer that these previews are going to be from the eye of a casual sports fan. And last but not least, the order which of these teams are just going to be discussed is going to be by division. So not like my season recaps where it's going to be by the draft order. You know, like for example, the first overall pick down to the last pick in the NFL draft. Now this is going to be by every division, like every 4 teams within the 8 divisions. So 4 teams, 8 divisions. So you do the math. Anyway, that being said, I ramble enough of how we do things here with our season previews. Now let's talk about the very first team, the very first set of teams in our NFL season preview month, and that resides in the NFC West Division. As we begin our journey into NFL season preview month 2024, we begin with the teams I always come to first because it's a certain team that I'm a fan of. But nonetheless, we have to talk about the rest of the teams that are within this division. Because with the NFC West last year, it had its moments of strangling between 3 of the 4 teams within them. But outside of that, it wasn't really much of a doubt that one certain red and gold team down in Santa Clara, just a little bit of a drive for me, they would emerge again at the top of the division. But going into this year, as we get ready for 2024, things are looking, I'd say, a lot different now, because it's going to be the same bar fight between those 3 teams. Man, maybe, just maybe, there's going to be some Redbirds from the desert that could make this a total free-for-all for the NFC West. Especially for the red and gold team up in that drive, it's going to come off a gutting big game loss months prior, and whether they can bounce back. So that being said, let's take a look at this NFC West division and where they stack up going into 2024. Kicking off our NFL season preview month is the Redbirds in the desert, that is the Arizona Cardinals. For the Arizona Cardinals, last year, their 2023 just went as you expected, because they're missing their starting quarterback in Kyler Murray for half of the year. And before he came back, it was a little bit of, evaluating your young players. You're going through a quarterback in Josh Dobbs that, he tried to guide them, but it didn't really amount to much. But once Kyler Murray came back and he was back to pre-ACL tear form, which was a good thing for Arizona. And even though they ended their season with the same record as they did the year prior, 4-13, they did end with multiple young players showing promise, and they got 2 upset wins over 2 playoff contenders that would eventually fall in the playoffs, like, pretty badly. So for the Arizona Cardinals, you wanted to go into 2024 to try and improve on the last 2 years of misfortune, and that's pretty much your goal for this year. Because looking back at this past offseason, you didn't have to worry so much about any drama surrounding quarterback issues with Kyler Murray, like a contract extension or some weird clause where, you have to do your homework, pal, or any head coaching searches or general manager searches. So for the first time in quite some time, Jonathan Gannon and the Redbirds in the desert finally got to focus on building their team for the upcoming season. So some of the things that I was hoping the Arizona Cardinals would do this past offseason was, they had to rebuild around the receiving room, because the talent around Kyler Murray or whoever was at quarterback, there wasn't really a lot, because all you had was James Conner. He was pretty much the engine of that whole offense. And time and time again, you would have Trey McBride. That was pretty much it. That was pretty much your whole offense. And then defensively, you needed to have either another defensive lineman, but also there are some concerns on that offensive line as well. So those are the things that I was hoping Arizona would address this past offseason. So looking at those offseason moves that Arizona addressed, looking at their free agent moves, honestly didn't really lose a whole lot. Like Marquise Hollywood Brown to the Kansas City Chiefs. When you look at Marquise's time during Arizona, it really didn't amount to much because I was really hoping that Kyler Murray and Marquise Hollywood Brown would be a nice connection, but it just didn't pan out. Rondale Moore went to the Falcons. Another receiver 3 he showed some flashes, but it didn't really like amount to much. And then defensively, Antonio Hamilton went to the Falcons as well. So again, you didn't really lose a lot if you were the Arizona Cardinals with so much money to spend, and they spent to a degree. Like you got an offensive lineman in Jonah Williams, center Evan Brown from the Seahawks, and then on the defensive trenches, you got Bael Nichols from the Raiders, Justin Jones from the Bears. So some kind of like rotational players. And then in the secondary, you got Sean Murphy Bunting from the Titans. So a big get for a Cardinals secondary that really sucked in the passing defense. But at least you get a veteran presence now in that area. Especially when you look at the draft, you get Max Milton from Rutgers and Elijah Jones from Boston College in the later rounds of the draft. So you could build around a trio there. And then the biggest move that they made in the draft was obviously the one that most people were expecting, and that was with the 4th overall pick, receiver Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State. So basically, Arizona addressed their obvious yet biggest need in top receiver in this offseason because, like I said, they were severely lacking in talent, and they're severely lacking with help around Kyler Murray. And well, they still need to address some parts of it. Getting a number 1 receiver for Kyler Murray was the biggest must because he's been very lacking that since, I believe, DeAndre Hopkins. And I forgot. But anyway, I had a blank there. But anyway, getting a receiver like Marvin Harrison Jr., who was a stud for Ohio State, he was a good get. But they still have some work to do. They still have some work to do, especially defensively. They have potential, but they do have some glaring concerns, like in the front 7, where they still have a middling pass rush despite drafting Darius Robinson at edge rusher. Other than that, they don't really have a whole lot in that pass rushing department. But on the other side, on the other end of it, the back half of it, like I said, with drafting Max Melton and Elijah Jones, and then you add a veteran presence in Sean Murphy Bunting, who won a Super Bowl with the Bucs, they could form a nice back half alongside your safeties that were already good, Budda Baker and Garrett Williams. So this Arizona team, it's going to be competitive. It's going to be a fighting bunch, especially when you look at their key games this season where they really have to prove themselves. And that already proves that with their week 1 date with the Buffalo Bills. They have to travel to upstate New York to face the Bills. And yeah, the Bills are in a little bit of a phase, but you still have to play Josh Allen, who's going to be always going to be a rough go. And then you come home to face Matthew Stafford in the Rams in the following week. And then the next week, you get a date with the Detroit Lions, the conference semifinalists from last year. And then probably one of your other key games within the division comes 2 weeks later when you have to travel to San Francisco to face the 49ers. So for the Arizona Cardinals, some of my biggest questions for them going into this season has to be, who's going to be the other guy that's going to help out Marvin Harrison Jr. At receiver, because teams are going to be picking on, they're trying to do their best to double team or like put their best corner on Marvin Harrison Jr. So who's going to be that number 2 or number 3 that's going to be opposite of him? Because you can't always rely on Trey McBride. You can't always rely on Greg Dortch, because don't get me wrong, they were consistent producers last year. James Conner, he's been pretty good too, but he hasn't always been able to stay healthy. But their supporting cast needs to step up outside of those 3, and of course now you have Marvin Harrison Jr. So who's going to be that guy? And then for Kyler Murray, speaking of staying healthy, can he stay healthy for a full season? Because he hasn't been able to do that since he came into the league in 2019. And now that he's coming off a torn ACL in the second half of 2022, he looked good. He looked good coming back in the second half of 2023, despite a poor supporting cast. And he should hope, and Arizona should hope, that he'll be better with more ample talent around him and a full offseason to prepare now. So they did a good job filling up some of their major flaws from last year. There's still some things to address, like how are they gonna address the pass rush? How's that gonna look? Who's gonna be that number 2 or 3 receiver behind Marvin Harrison Jr. that's gonna be that running mates? But I think Arizona's gonna be a fighting bunch with the group of young players that they have, and while they may not be there quite yet in terms of being against the Rams and the 49ers yet, I think the Arizona Cardinals, they could give a run for their money, run for teams' money this coming season. We'll just see how they'll do. And granted, if Kyler Murray can stay healthy. Moving on to the Seattle Seahawks, who in 2023 regressed some because they fell into a rerun of their surprise 2022, except in contrast to his comeback of the player of the year type of performance, Geno Smith had one too many inconsistent performances. And while injuries happen, they were kind of key games that he missed. And among other things that the Seahawks did that caused them to barely miss the playoffs. But nonetheless, they finished 9-8 and, like I said, barely missed the playoffs. And they decided, you know what? It's time for a change. It's time for a change that can finally help us get over the hump and probably make a deep playoff run. So when you look at those key changes, the biggest one that they made was getting rid of Pete Carroll as their head coach, but not necessarily get rid of him entirely. So they had Pete Carroll step down as head coach, and they reassigned him into an advisory role within the organization. So interesting that it took them this long to get rid of Pete Carroll as their head coach, but nonetheless, they have moved on to a new head coach by the name of Mike Macdonald, who had spent the last 2 seasons as the Ravens defensive coordinator. And probably the biggest thing that will change with that move is hopefully that defense, that horrific defense of the Seattle Seahawks. But we'll talk about that in a bit. So some of the other moves that the Seahawks made this past offseason, before we talk about the other moves, is re-signing a few of their key players like Leonard Williams at defensive tackle, and giving Tyler Lockett a 2-year extension, and then also re-signing Noah Fant. So 3 key players at different positions, but who they didn't keep this past offseason was safeties Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs. The thing with those two is that they haven't been able to stay healthy for the last few seasons, and their production was really starting to go down. They became casualties. So anyway, when you look at their past offseason, what I was hoping that they were going to do is address that lacking pass rush, because outside of Leonard Williams, they were not getting to the quarterback, and they had a serious issue at stopping the run, like a very serious issue. And I was hoping that they would fix the interior offensive line, because Damian Lewis and Evan Brown, they were all right, but sometimes they would have trouble protecting Geno Smith. So looking at some of their offseason moves, those two are gone. They moved on to other teams in free agency, and so did a couple of linebackers like Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner. They're also I'd say Jordan Brooks at least. Jordan Brooks, he's moved on to another team, and so did Bobby Wagner. So one key piece of that Seahawks defense is gone. So they tried to replace them with George Fant at offensive line from the Houston Texans. They also got Jerome Baker, but he comes with a suspect injury history. And they're trying to replace Jamal Adams with Rayshawn Jacobs from the Jaguars, and a defensive tackle to try and help out Leonard Williams, but I think he'll be a rotational piece in my opinion. And that is Jonathan Hackett from the Cowboys. So looking at these moves, it's a little middling. It's a little middling for the Seahawks, but I mean, again, it's still very early. It's still very early before September, but we'll see how it pans out. So looking at their draft, their key moves that they made, probably this is where they did their best work, and that was getting a defensive tackle by the name of Byron Murphy from the University of Texas. I think he'll be a better starting piece alongside Leonard Williams, and getting a guard, Christian Haynes from UConn, try and beef up that offensive line. And then getting a tight end, AJ Barner from Michigan, because they also did lose They also did lose a tight end. There's some of their tight ends like Colby Parkinson and Will Dissly in free agency. So they had to go get a tight end to back up Noah Fant, just in case he gets injured. So when you're looking at the Seahawks this coming season, I still think that they still have some concerns with their offensive line. Sure, they got a guard in Christian Haynes, who hopefully will do well, but there's three starters with Brown, Lewis, and now Phil Hayes, who also left in free agency. They're gone to other teams, and General Manager John Snyder, he didn't really do a whole lot other than getting Christian Hayes to rack up the protection for that offensive line that already had issues last year in protecting Geno. And if this doesn't get gelled in training camp, if this doesn't get gelled in preseason, I mean, it won't matter if Geno bounces back or if he doesn't. The offensive line protection, if it's so piss poor, then people are going to be calling that out. I hope they call it out if it's this bad. But defensively, I think like they'll be better, at least on paper. But that's gonna be my biggest question for them as we transition to that. Just how improved will Seattle's defense be this year? Because sure, Mike Macdonald will certainly be a huge upgrade, at least philosophically, with his experience like calling plays for like the Ravens. But how will he be as a head coach, and how will the players adjust to his scheme? So you already have players like Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy. They should form a nice pass rushing duo, and they also have a deep corner group like Devin Witherspoon and Reek Wolin. They're already a good duo. And also don't forget the reserves like Michael Jackson. Not that one. And then Kobe Bryant. Not that Kobe Bryant. It's a C and a BY. COBY. So they actually have a deep cornerback group, but they still have some things to figure out with that defense. Like who's their linebacker and safety spots. How are they going to figure all that out? As well as the rest of the defensive line. Because Draymond Jones and Jaron Reed, they were middling last year. And then when you look at Geno Smith too, is he going to have that rebounding year that I talked about? Or is he going to regress even further? He still has a strong supporting cast that includes DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. For those of you that kept nagging me about his last name last year. But anyway, he still has a very strong supporting cast, as well as, don't forget, that running back duo of Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker III. They're a pretty good duo. But the slight dip in production last year does have some cause for concern. And he's going to have to learn a new offense with the new quarterbacks coach, which hopefully he's doing well this past 2 months and going into training camp. But if he doesn't do well, then hopefully there'll be some like warning sign or some sirens going off for the quarterback they acquired via trade. That is quarterback Sam Howell from the Washington Commanders. So maybe I don't know how he's doing with this change, but we'll see. So looking at some of their key games going into this year, not really a whole lot early on in the first month, but their first key game comes within the division in week 6, only on Prime Video, by the way. And that comes against the San Francisco 49ers. And then you get a grueling gauntlet, whatever it is, weeks 8 to 9 against the Buffalo Bills and the LA Rams. Good luck with that one. And then you go to San Francisco in week 11, and then the following week against the Arizona Cardinals at home. So interesting slate for the Seattle Seahawks, and kind of a daunting one at that. So when you look at the Seahawks in 2024, you want to compete with the rest of the division with so much change that you have undergone. But at least you finally embraced the last part of change, which was getting rid of Pete Carroll, at least as a head coach. He's still there. But with that kind of change also comes more change. But in that part, again, more change, as I think I sneezed, in losing key rotational players and not being able to replace them. So on the surface, it seems like other teams have improved, and Seahawks, I feel they're in the middle of the bunch. if the Seahawks can't make the most of what they have, if not overcome that, I feel like they're going to struggle all year, especially if Geno Smith can't rise to the occasion. So we move from the Emerald City down to the city of Inglewood, where it's always no good, to talk about the LA Rams. The LA Rams, who overcame some first half struggles in 2023 to go 7-1 in the second half of that season. And while they lost their only playoff game to the Detroit Lions in a homecoming of sorts for Matthew Stafford, they put up a fight. They almost beat them. They almost upset them, but unfortunately, a mistake or two cost them their season. So going into 2024, with this balance of veteran presence and young players, you want to reclaim the NFC West Division. And with looking at some of their moves, they certainly can make a case for that. But some of the things that I felt like they needed to address this offseason if they wanted to do such, well, they got to retool that defense, especially considering the move that happened this past offseason. And another move that I felt like wasn't too necessary, but I felt like you want to start considering was finding a young quarterback to groom behind Matthew Stafford once that time came, especially considering that, they drafted Stetson Bennett last year, but there were some events that happened where he left the team and Sean McVay wasn't sure if it was going to come back. So in the event that Stetson Bennett doesn't come back, if he hasn't already, then I was hoping that the Rams would have found a quarterback behind that they were going to groom behind Matthew Stafford, but we were going to see if they were going to do that. So looking at some of their key offseason events, for the Rams, they did lose their defensive coordinator, Raheem Morris, as he became the new head coach for the Atlanta Falcons, replacing Arthur Smith, and he took some of McVay's staff with them. So they had to go find a new defensive coordinator, and which the Rams did. And they also re-signed one of their key guards, Kevin Dotson, so he's going to get a new running mate by the name of Jonah Jackson as we transition to the Rams additions in free agency. So the Rams beef up their offensive line, the interior, which was kind of a problematic area in 2023, but shouldn't be much of an issue going into this coming year, especially when you get Jonah one of the top guards in the NFL with Jackson, and now you pair him up with Kevin Dotson. Boom, there you go. Beefing up that protection for Matthew Stafford. Defensively, you look at corners, Tre'Davious White and Darius Williams, the newest additions for the Rams. Darius Williams returns to LA after a tenure in Jacksonville. And safety Cameron Curl for the Commanders. He player for that Commanders defense. And I feel like safety was kind of an issue for Los Angeles in the last few years, but getting Cameron Curl should be an upgrade for them. And a little bit of a surprise addition to the team, a name that certain fans should be familiar with of my team, Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo comes over from the Las Vegas Raiders, who released him, and Jimmy G is suspended 2 games for violating I'm not sure, it was like performance enhancing drugs, a policy on that. Yeah, interesting. Jimmy G comes over to the Raiders, not to the Raiders, the Rams. Huh? What about that, huh? But probably the other big piece of events that happened this past offseason was Aaron Donald announcing his retirement. One of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. He announced his retirement, and probably his long song came 2 years ago at the Super Bowl, being a key part of that in flustering Joe Burrow. And outside of Cooper Kupp, he was the Super Bowl MVP in that game. And then they also lost Brian Allen to the Cleveland Browns. So, they already, I'm pretty sure that they already replaced them with this draft. But with the draft, they pretty much beefed up their defense, getting edge rusher Jared Verse from Florida State, and also from Florida State, Braden Fisk. So that defensive line is already looking beefy. And they also got another safety, Cameron Kirchens from the University of Miami. They also got another edge rusher from Brendan Jackson. And just in the event that their top running back gets injured, Blake Comron. So for the Rams, going into this season, their offensive line is already looking like one of the best. So pretty much their trenches is going to be one of the best. Take that back. They're both sides of the lines could be one of the best. Could be really good. especially that offensive line, because it was improved last year, but there's, like I said, there are issues within the interior. Especially when you look at last year, left tackle Alaric Johnson broke out as a strong protector for Stafford. And second-year guard Steve Avila, he's going to move to center. He was pretty good, but that interior had some issues. But now that you have Kevin Dotson, you already re-signed Kevin Dotson, and now you bring over Jonah Jackson from the Lions. He does come up with some injury history, but I feel like with those guys now beefing up the offensive line, I feel like it'll be much better. And then defensively, you got a really good core with how many players you got in the draft at edge rusher, and then addressing Aaron Donald's retirement by getting Braden Fisk, who looks really good. I feel like the Rams in the trenches are going to be really good, especially considering that you already got Ernest Jones in there. So should be an interesting front on both in the trenches for both sides of the ball for LA. But their special teams does remain a concern because they had kicking issues all year last year with controversial kicker Brett Maher. And I don't mean like off field, but on field, he was really bad for the Cowboys, and that carried over when he came to LA. And in their lone playoff game, he had some kicking issues as well. So they took the route with drafting a sixth round kicker. While it is sensible, they just better hope that Josh Carty is going to perform well in actual game time action, especially in those clutch situations. So looking at their schedule, looking at some of their key games that are going to be pivotal for them, right off the bat, you're facing the Detroit Lions in Detroit in a rematch of that wild card game. Interesting. Interesting, the NFL scheduled that, and on Sunday night too. That should be a lot of fun. Like Matthew Stafford immediately returning back to Detroit, like several months later, from that playoff game, and then you go right back to Detroit in week 1. Love it from the NFL. And then I normally say there's one game, but it's both games against the San Francisco 49ers because probably their biggest competition within the division. So week 3 and week 15, those are going to be pivotal games if you want to try snatching the division from San Francisco. And then some competition outside the conference against the Miami Dolphins in week 10. And then probably a pivotal game in week 12 against the Philadelphia Eagles 2 weeks later. So for the Rams, like, how is those defensive additions? Like, I know I've been like kind of giving my praises a little for those Rams, that Rams defense, but obviously it's going to be how they translate that on the field. So they should be better, but again, it doesn't automatically mean they'll be good once they step on the field. Like, I like the moves that they made, especially within the trenches, but when it comes to the secondary, it should be good. It should be good too, but Tre'Davious White does have some injury history. He's got to stay healthy. And with Darius Williams, he's back, but he has to adjust to a new defensive coordinator. So offensively, how will the young receivers follow up last year's breakout surge? Because Puka Nacua, he surprised everyone, but everyone's going to be ready for him now. And then you got other receivers like DeMarcus Robinson and Tutu Atwell. They've been reliable options too to help ease off the pressure off Puka and Cooper Kupp. But now that they got a full season under their belts, there's going to be room for opportunity. That trio can be even better as long as they stay that way to form a strong quartet alongside Cooper Kupp, who has had some issues staying healthy this last year. So for the Rams, they were already loaded up with a roster that had emerging youngsters like Nacua, Byron Young, Ernest Jones, and Kyron Williams. And the list goes on and on for LA. And they added on it even further with all these biggest needs that they had to add, like the offensive line and the secondary. So as long as Matthew Stafford can stay healthy and these young players can keep exceeding everyone's expectations, I feel like the Rams have a pretty good shot in not just making the playoffs, but maybe snatching the NFC West Division. And yeah, that's coming from me, a certain red and gold fan. But we'll see what happens in this upcoming season. But I feel like the Rams have a pretty good shot at going for more this coming season. wrapping up part 1 of our 2024 NFL season previews, and with the NFC West is none other than my team, that being the San Francisco 49ers. With the 49ers, they were pretty good in 2023 behind Brock Purdy's strong first full season as a starting quarterback, and he shocked the world in this couple of games in 2022, but 2023 was something else. He helped the 49ers surge to the NFC's top seed, and in the playoffs, he helped them overcome 2 tough playoff opponents in the Packers and the Lions to advance to Super Bowl 58. Unfortunately, they just couldn't finish the story. He played pretty good in that game, but the rest of the team, I don't know. Especially Kyle Shanahan, man. Those memories. Unfortunately, they once again fell to Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in a Super Bowl 54 rematch in overtime. In a heartbreaker I'd rather not talk about, key mistakes led to their downfall. Coaching decisions led to their downfall. But nonetheless, here we are, once again, trying to figure out how they're going to finish the story. How are they going to do the Cody Rhodes? How are they going to do the Liv Morgan of 20? How are they able to finish their story, but not my 49ers? That would have been, this already would have been the perfect year, man. But no, they just had to fuck it up. Like Kyle Shanahan just had to fuck it up. Like, so many bad things went our way in that Super Bowl, but I don't want to relive it. But anyway, we're on to a new season for the 49ers, and they made some changes. To try and hopefully right the wrong going into this upcoming season. So they fired Steve Wilkes, who I feel like they made him a scapegoat, but he was already having some issues in this past season with his scheme. I guess the players weren't really liking to Steve Wilkes. So they replaced him with Nick Sorensen, an internal hire, as defensive coordinator. But then for some other reason, they hired former Chargers head coach Brandon Staley. Yeah, let's hire the guy that clippered the organization for the last 2 years, and pretty much gave them their worst beatdown in 2023 against the Raiders of all teams. The Raiders, who also had an interim head coach, like on Amazon Prime Video, Brandon Staley got his ass whooped by an interim head coach by like 50 points on Amazon Prime Video. Yeah, let's hire Brandon Staley as a assistant head coach / defensive assistant. But I mean, maybe he'll lead something. Maybe he'll hopefully teach Kyle Shanahan to not to choke. Hopefully, but maybe it'll be something positive. I don't know. But some other changes that they made, they decided to release defensive tackle Eric Armstead to get some salary cap money, and I feel like it was time to move on from Eric Armstead. Now, as sometimes productive as he was, he just couldn't stay healthy at times. So I felt like it was time to move on from him. But they also re-signed receiver Juwan Jennings, who was very key in trying to win that Super Bowl, because my God, I don't know where everyone else was. I don't know where the rest of the team was with Debo, Kittle in that game. But Juwan Jennings stepped up to the plate in that Super Bowl. And they also re-signed guard John Feliciano, who was a solid piece for that offensive line, which kind of struggled a bit. So obviously, the number one goal for this team in 2024 is you got to make it back to the Super Bowl. There's no if, ands, or buts. And we'll talk about it like later, like with, all these hypotheticals. But damn it, you got to make it back to the Super Bowl, and you got to finish the damn story. And this was the perfect year. Like I said, this was the perfect year to do it. Everything was set up perfectly. Super Bowl or bust. You could have finished the story like Cody Rhodes did, like Liv Morgan did. But no, Kyle Shanahan, like the ultimate fuck up the century. The NFL setting things up because, we wanted to have Taylor Swift suck that, with Travis Kelce and Roger Goodell and Patrick Mahomes. Like, I want to suck that Lombardi, you know what? But anyway, I don't want to dive too much in that anymore. So anyway, just make it back to the Super Bowl and finish the damn story, please. Anyway, some of the things that I was the 49ers addressed in the offseason was committing to the fixing the offensive line, because the offensive line has been a serious issue for this team ever since, well, whether it was Trey Lance, whether it was Jimmy Garoppolo, whether it was Brock Purdy in these last couple of years. Horrific blocking from this offensive line, especially in the interior. Like, what the frick? No, not the interior. The right side of the offensive line. Bad, really bad. And then, of course, the big topic of discussion, and probably still is at the time of this recording, maybe it still isn't, Brandon Ayuk. Extending Brandon Ayuk to a long-term deal. And again, I'm not sure if it's already done by now, but hopefully it is. So some of the moves that they made this past offseason, they didn't really lose a whole lot, which is always a good thing. They lost Chase Young and Randy Gregory to other teams, but I mean, they didn't really move the needle as the season wore on. One kind of sad move was Javon Kinlaw to the Jets. It was kind of disappointing how he didn't pan out. A former first-round pick, but I felt like in 2023, he's starting to show a little bit of flashes, but unfortunately, I'm not sure what happened, but kind of sad. So they made bigger moves. They made bigger moves in free agency with who they added, like Leonard Floyd from the Bills and Gross Moss from the Panthers. So that edge rushing duo opposite Nick Bosa should hopefully help out. Hopefully Nick Bosa has some little bit less pressure on himself. Internally with the defensive line, you have Jordan Elliott from the Browns, Malik Collins they trade for from the Texans. So hopefully those will be the replacements for Eric Armstead. And hopefully some help for Javon Hargrave. And then you get a corner from Isaac Yiadom from the Saints. And then looking at their draft, I was screaming to the clouds, get an offensive lineman, get a right tackle. But no, they get a receiver by the name of Ricky Pearsall from Florida. Now, I was kind of upset. I was really upset that they didn't get an offensive lineman. But I guess there's nobody left. There's nobody left to get. But I'm just glad that they did finally address the offensive line in the third round of the draft. And he looks all right. He looks pretty good. And so far, from what I'm hearing in these mini camps, he's performing pretty good. So hopefully that turns out to be a point. And he can play all positions. He can play guard, he can play center, he can play tackle. So he has some flexibility within the offensive line, which is always a good thing. They also got another corner by the name of Renardo Green from Florida State. So overall, when you're looking at for my 49ers, they potentially upgraded their defensive line and got Nick Bosa some much needed help, because that defensive front has had talent for the last few years, yet it underperformed when you get to these big moments. From the looks of things, though, that may change with the addition of Jordan Elliott, Gross Moss, and especially Leonard Floyd to help out Nick Bosa and Javon Hargrave, because they've had so much pressure put on them this past year, but they can seriously use the help. And then don't forget the young players like Drake Jackson, who I thought was going to be a serious presence, but I guess the injury, he just couldn't stay healthy this past season. And then Robert Beal, who I hope can turn out into something. So hopefully they can pan out as we get into training camp. And then same within the defense. That cornerback room is the most crowded that I've ever seen in the Kyle Shanahan tenure. And that's a good thing, because the biggest weakness for this 49ers team has been the back half of that secondary, because especially when you look at the passing defense behind Javarius Ward and Diamador Lenore. So adding Yiadom, Rock Ya-Sin, and Bernardo Green, the likes of them, and then I'm hoping that Darrell Luter Jr. comes along in year 2. So it's going to be a competition between all those four, but hopefully they have some serious depth behind Ward and Lenore come week 1. So hopefully that cornerback room is really beefed up and really good as the season progresses. So looking at some of their key games going into hopefully their year. Week 1 against the New York Jets. So playing Aaron Rodgers on a Monday night. Yeah, what a way to pump up our blood pressure already. And then 2 weeks later, you go to LA on the back half of a road trip to play the LA Rams. Levi South. But that should be an interesting game. And then a couple weeks later, the Super Bowl rematch against the Kansas City Chiefs. How How are you going to respond to that one? And I know it's only the regular season, but who knows? I'm actually not going to get into that, whether it's going to be that or that. And then a week later, you play the Dallas Cowboys before your bye week. I mean, it's the Cowboys, but, you never know. So, obviously, my biggest questions for my 49ers going into 2024 is, are they going to get this extension done with Brandon Ayuk? I know, things have been progressing some, but I just want this deal to get done already. And if it has been by now, great. I'm just glad they got that cloud lifted off. But they just need it. I'm just tired of another offseason where it's like contract drama this, contract drama that. Oh, well, Debo gets signed. Well, Nick Bosa gets signed. Well, Fred Warner gets signed. Or now it's Brandon Ayuk. And then next year will be Brock Purdy. It's like, God damn. Oh, speaking of Brock Purdy, how will he perform this season now that he had a full offseason under his belt? I just hope that now that he's had a full offseason under his wing, he's going to be a lot better, because he didn't have that benefit last year. But hopefully, going into this year, he's going to look a lot better and exceed expectations again. So for the 49ers, on paper, they remain one of the best teams in the NFL, and they could be better since they didn't really lose anyone of value in free agency, and they finally have a crowded cornerback room. The offensive line looks okay, a little bit, very slightly better, but not much. But now Brock Purdy underwent his full offseason, and he's done OTAs, he's done mini camps, and now he's going to do a full training camp, which is very good. That being said, though, they're still coming off not just their second Super Bowl loss to the Chiefs in 5 years, but one of the most heartbreaking ones in over a decade. They've been here before in 2020, and they were rewarded with injury mania running wild, pal, in that pandemic 6-10 season in 2020. And they better not fall victim. They better not fall victim to the dreaded Super Bowl losers curse again. I do not want to see that again. Everything came crashing down in week 2, and then just came down and down and down with those injuries. We better not have that again in 2024. So they need to get past that loser's curse. And this feels like a last dance type of season, because you have players like Ayuk, Debo, Greenlaw, and others on the last year of their contracts, or some of them might also be contract extension eligible, like Trent Williams, and especially Brock Purdy, heading into those negotiating extensions after this coming season. So if Kyle Shanahan and company don't finish their story like they should have back in February, then I expect serious changes to come after 2024, because I don't know, for as calm, as collective as Jed York has become nowadays, I don't know if he's willing to be as calm as collective with, not failing to once again finish the story once again in 2024. You better get it done. You better get it done, Kyle. I swear. And that is a wrap on part 1 of our 2024 NFL season preview month. And we talked about in this one, the Arizona Cardinals, the Seattle Seahawks, the LA Rams, and my San Francisco 49ers. And in the next part, we're going to be talking about 4 other teams that reside in the NFC North Division. So stay tuned for that one. But for now, let me know your takes and your expectations for these 4 teams in the NFC West. And whether you're a fan of them or you're on a neutral playing field, I'd like to know your opinions on these 4 teams going into 2024, and your overall opinions on my takes on these 4 teams heading into this upcoming NFL season. But for now, that is a wrap on this episode of Very Cold Lasagna, episode number 202 of this icy yet spicy sports podcast. And until the next one, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports, and peace out.